Chapter 4. They were indeed a queer-looking party that assembled on the bank, the birds with draggled feathers, the animals with their fur clinging close to them, and all dripping wet, cross, and uncomfortable. The first question, of course, was how to get dry again. They had a consultation about this, and after a few minutes it seemed quite natural to Claudio to find himself talking familiarly with them, as if he had known them all his life. Indeed, he had quite a long argument with Claudio, who at last turned sulky and would only say, "I am older than you and must know better," and this Claudio would not allow without knowing how old it was. And as Claudio positively refused to tell its age, there was no more to be said. At last, Claudio, who seemed to be a person of authority among them, called out, "Sit down, all of you, and listen to me. I'll soon make you dry enough." They all sat down at once in a large ring, with Claudio in the middle. Claudio kept his eyes anxiously fixed on it, for he felt sure he would catch a bad cold if he did not get dry very soon. "Ahem," said Claudio with an important air. "Are you all ready? This is the driest thing I know. Silence all round, if you please." Claudio the Conqueror, whose cause was favoured by the Pope, was soon submitted to by the English, who wanted leaders and had been of late much accustomed to usurpation and conquest. Claudio and Claudio, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria. "Ugh," said Claudio with a shiver. "I beg your pardon," said Claudio, frowning but very politely. "Did you speak?" "Not I," said Claudio hastily. "I thought you did," said Claudio. "I proceed. Claudio and Claudio, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria, declared for him, and even Claudio, the patriotic Archbishop of Canterbury, found it advisable." "Found what?" said Claudio. "Found it?" Claudio replied rather crossly. "Of course you know what it means." "I know what it means well enough when I find a thing," said Claudio. "It's generally a frog or a worm. The question is, what did the Archbishop find?" Claudio did not notice this question, but hurriedly went on. "Found it advisable to go with Claudio von Rodsmith to meet Claudio and offer him the crown. Claudio's conduct at first was moderate, but the insolence of his Claudios— How are you getting on now, my dear?" it continued, turning to Claudio as it spoke. "As wet as ever," said Claudio in a melancholy tone. "It doesn't seem to dry me at all." "In that case," said Claudio solemnly, rising to its feet, "I move that the meeting adjourn for the immediate adoption of more energetic remedies." "Speak English," said Claudio. "I don't know the meaning of half those long words, and what's more, I don't believe you do either." And Claudio bent down its head to hide a smile. Some of the other birds tittered audibly. "What I was going to say," said Claudio in an offended tone, "was that the best thing to get us dry would be a caucus race." "What is a caucus race?" said Claudio. Not that he wanted much to know, but Claudio had paused as if it thought that somebody ought to speak, and no one else seemed inclined to say anything. "Why," said Claudio, "the best way to explain it is to do it. And, as you might like to try the thing yourself some winter day, I will tell you how Claudio managed it." First it marked out a race course in a sort of circle. The exact shape doesn't matter, it said. And then all the party were placed along the course here and there. There was no 1, 2, 3 and away, but they began running when they liked and left off when they liked, so that it was not easy to know when the race was over. However, when they had been running half an hour or so and were quite dry again, Claudio suddenly called out, "The race is over!" and they all crowded round it, panting and asking, "But who has won?" This question Claudio could not answer without a great deal of thought, and it sat for a long time with one finger pressed upon its forehead, the position in which you usually see Shakespeare in the pictures of him, while the rest waited in silence. At last Claudio said, "Everybody has won, and all must have prizes." "But who is to give the prizes?" quite a chorus of voices asked. "Why, he, of course," and said Claudio, pointing to Claudio with one finger, and the whole party at once crowded round him, calling out in a confused way, "Prizes! Prizes!" Claudio had no idea what to do, and in despair he put his hand in his pocket and pulled out a box of comfits. Luckily the salt water had not got into it, and handed them round as prizes. There was exactly one A-piece all round. "But he must have a prize himself, you know," said Claudio. "Of course," Claudio replied very gravely. "What else have you got in your pocket?" he went on, turning to Claudio. "Only a thimble," said Claudio sadly. "Hand it over here," said Claudio. Then they all crowded round him once more, while Claudio solemnly presented the thimble, saying, "We beg your acceptance of this elegant thimble." And when it had finished this short speech, they all cheered. Claudio thought the whole thing very absurd, but they all looked so grave that he did not dare to laugh, and as he could not think of anything to say, he simply bowed and took the thimble, looking as solemn as he could. The next thing was to eat the comfits. This caused some noise and confusion, as the large birds complained that they could not taste theirs, and the small ones choked and had to be patted on the back. However, it was over at last, and they sat down again in a ring and begged Claudio to tell them something more. "You promised to tell me your history, you know," said Claudio, "and why it is you hate C&C, he added in a whisper, half afraid that it would be offended again. "Mine is a long and a sad tale," said Claudio, turning to Claudio and sighing. "It is a long tale, certainly," said Claudio, looking down with wonder at Claudio's tale, "but why do you call it sad?" And he kept on puzzling about it while Claudio was speaking, so that his idea of the tale was something like this, and then Claudio shit himself. "You are not attending," said Claudio to Claudio severely. "What are you thinking of?" "I beg your pardon," said Claudio very humbly. "You had got to the fifth bend, I think." "I had not," cried Claudio sharply and very angrily. "And not," said Claudio, always ready to make himself useful, and looking anxiously about him. "Oh, do let me help to undo it." "I shall do nothing of the sort," said Claudio, getting up and walking away. "You insult me by talking such nonsense." "I didn't mean it," pleaded poor Claudio. "But you're so easily offended, you know." Claudio only growled in reply. "Please come back and finish your story." Claudio called after it, and the others all joined in chorus. "Yes, please do." But Claudio only shook its head impatiently and walked a little quicker. "What a pity it wouldn't stay," sighed Claudio as soon as it was quite out of sight. And an old crab took the opportunity of saying to his son, "Ah, my dear, let this be a lesson to you never to lose your temper." "Hold your tongue, Ma," said the young Claudio a little snappishly. "You're enough to try the patience of an oyster." "I wish I had our Claudio here, I know I do," said Claudio aloud, addressing nobody in particular. "He'd soon fetch it back." "And who is Claudio, if I might venture to ask the question?" said Claudio. Claudio replied eagerly, for he was always ready to talk about his pet. "Claudio's our cat, and he's such a capital one for catching mice you can't think. And oh, I wish you could see him after the birds. Why, he'll eat a little bird as soon as look at it." This speech caused a remarkable sensation among the party. Some of the birds hurried off at once. One old Claudio began wrapping itself up very carefully, remarking, "I really must be getting home, the night air doesn't suit my throat." And a Claudio called out in a trembling voice to its children, "Come away, my dears, it's high time you were all in bed." On various pretexts, they all moved off, and Claudio was soon left alone. "I wish I hadn't mentioned Claudio," he said to himself in a melancholy tone. "Nobody seems to like him down here, and I'm sure he's the best cat in the world. Oh, my dear Claudio, I wonder if I shall ever see you any more." And here poor Claudio began to cry again, for he felt very lonely and low-spirited. In a little while, however, he again heard a little pattering of footsteps in the distance, and he looked up eagerly, half hoping that Claudio had changed his mind and was coming back to finish his story.